Howdy, we're now into chapter 15. I think this means about 15 down and 10 to go. So stick with me. We've got 3 videos. As always, I want to give proper attribution to my working associate, Dr. Art Conklin at University of Houston, who has allowed me to use his slides. And given feedback from the course, I went with these slides as opposed to the ones I had done that summarize them. So what are we going to talk about in video 1? Well, we're going to describe various types of attacks, computer and network attacks, denial of service, spoofing, hijacking, password guessing, different types of malicious software, viruses, worms, Trojan horses, logic bombs, time bombs, rootkits. We talk about how social engineering can be used, and we're going to describe the importance of auditing and what should be audited. Let me emphasize this for this chapter. This is an important chapter to learn terms and concepts. Every word here, denial of service, spoofing, hijacking, password guessing, password cracking, brute force attacks, you should be able to give me a definition. Viruses, worms, Trojan horses, logic bombs, time bombs, rootkits, same. Social engineering, you should be able to tell me how social engineering works. And then, of course, I'm big on auditing, as I've used before. If you train, you audit that training by going back and doing some kind of checks on people. Many times this is cases where, let's say we did training on phishing attacks, and then we, a couple weeks later, send out a phishing attack and see how many employees actually click when they should not click. Same is true anything you do. Anytime you do something, you put a security control in place, the next question you should be asking yourself is, how can I audit that this is done as it is intended? So let's work through the terminology. Okay, auditing, actions or processes that verify the assigned privileges and rights of a user or any capabilities used to create and maintain a record showing who accessed a particular system and what actions they performed. And in a general sense, it's any actions or processes that are used to verify whatever action was taken is being implemented as intended. A backdoor is a hidden method used to gain access to a computer system, network, or application. It's often used by software developers to ensure unrestricted access to the system they create. It's synonymous with a trapdoor. One of the 2 biggest areas of concern now in companies are insider threat and social engineering. Insider threat is where a person with a high level of privilege is getting ready to leave the job, perhaps, and leaves open a back door. Birthday attack is a form of attack in which the attack needs to match not a specific item, but just one of a set of items. A botnet is a term for a collection of software robots or bots that run autonomously and automatically and commonly invisibly to the background. It's often associated with malicious software, but it can also refer to the network of computers using distributed computing software. Buffer overflow, a specific type of software coding error that enables user input to overflow the allocated storage areas and corrupt a running program. As an aside, on your syllabus somewhere, I've put the OWASP top 10. If you're not familiar with these, you can Google those. I'm looking for my syllabus. But buffer overflow is always on the top 10 for the OWASP top 10. I guess that will be next week. Denial of service attack is an attack which the actions are taken to deprive authorized individuals from accessing a system, its resources, the data it stores or processes, or the network it is connected. Distributed denial of service attacks are a special kind of DOS attack in which the attacker elicits the generally unwilling support of other systems to launch a many against one attack. DNS kiting is the use of a DNS domain name server record during the payment grace period without paying. Drive-by download attack is an attack on an innocent victim machine where content is downloaded without the user's knowledge. Integer overflow is an error condition caused by the mismatch between a variable assigned storage size and the size of the value being manipulated. And a logic bomb is a form of malicious code or software that is triggered by a special event or condition. Also see time bomb. Malware, a class of software that's designed to cause harm. Man-in-the-middle attack, any attack that attempts to use a network node as an intermediary between two other nodes. So each of the endpoint nodes thinks it's talking directly to the other, doesn't realize that there's something in the middle and that it's actually talking to the intermediary. Null session, the way the network's Windows represents an unauthenticated connection. Farming, PH, not farming with an F, is the use of a fake website to social engineer someone out of credentials. Phishing is the use of social engineering to trick a user into responding to something such as an email or to instantiate a malware-based attack. Ransomware is malware that encrypts sensitive files and offers a return for a ransom. Replay attack is an attack where data is replayed through a system to produce a series of transactions. Rootkit is a form of malware that modifies the OS in a system to change the behavior of the system. System or sequence number is a number within a TCP packet to maintain TCP connections and conversation integrity. Smurf attack is a method of generating significant number of packets for a DOS attack. Sniffing, we've talked about before. It's the use of a hardware or software device called a sniffer to observe network traffic as it passes through a network on a shared broadcast media. Spear phishing is a form of targeted phishing where specific information is included to convince the recipient that the communication is genuine. You should be thinking of different kinds of attacks that this could use for spear phishing. For instance, a phishing attack goes out and tries to get general information. Something spear phishing gives you enough information that you're convinced the communication is genuine. You don't even question the validity. Spoofing is making data appear to originate from another source so as to hide the true origin of the recipient. And spyware is malware designed to spy on a use, typically recording information such as keystrokes for passwords. The SYN flood is a method of performing DOS by exhausting TCP connection resources through partially opening connections and letting them time out. TCP IP hijacking, an attack where the attacker intercepts and hijacks an established TCP connection. Trojan is a form of malicious code that appears to provide one service and may indeed provide that service, but that also hides another purpose, and the hidden purpose has a malicious intent. It's also referred to as a Trojan horse. Trojan or Trojan horse. Typo squatting is an attack form that involves capitalizing upon common typo errors. Virus is a form of malicious code or software that attaches itself to other pieces of code in order to replicate. Viruses may contain a payload, which is a portion of the code that is designed to execute when a certain condition is met, such as on a certain date. This payload is often malicious in nature. Worm as an independent piece of malicious code or software that replicates, and unlike a virus, it does not need to be attached to another piece of code. So a worm replicates by breaking into another system and making a copy of itself on the new system. It may contain a destructive payload, doesn't have to. And a zombie is a machine that is at least partially under the control of a botnet. So how are these all used in an avenue of attack? Systems are attacked for two general reasons. First, specifically attacked by an attacker. I'm going to attack the Democratic National Convention's computers, as the Russians did in 2016, for a political reason. It's on my attacker's motivation, and it's not relying on their hardware and software. I am going to go after a specific target, or it's a target of opportunity. Hey, I'm going to be scanning things, looking for things, software, hardware vulnerabilities, and this one's more difficult, make time and effort. But the thing you want to think about is when you analyze an attack, what is the motivation of the attacker? Because this may give you some insight into what data and information to protect and defend. If you have read what went on with the DNC in 2016, it was a comedy of errors in John Podesta, the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, actually responding to a phishing attack and giving away credentials that immediately escalated the Russian hackers to have full access to all of his emails. Okay, so you want to minimize that. We want to figure out how to ensure the patches are done. We want to limit the services that are running the system. We want to limit public disclosure of private information. Think about this. This is the heart of this class. Patches, passwords, limit the services that are running, limit the public exposure of private information. Now, what you say is, these are the steps. What are the mechanisms I put in place to do this? Let's start talking first about malicious code. It can be complex in its construction with specific feature design to assist malware in avoiding detection. It can be multi-part. It can have several pieces working together to achieve a desired effect. That's why patching of vulnerabilities is important, for it closes the point of entry for most malware. And this type of malicious code, or this list, viruses, trojans, logic bombs, spyware, worms, it can be very complex in its construction. And we're not going to worry about the rest of those terms. Viruses. Best known of malicious code is a virus. It's a piece that replicates by attaching itself to another piece of executable code. It's typically very small, hard to detect. When the executable code is run, the virus also executes, has the opportunity to infect other files and perform any other nefarious actions. The specific way that it affects other files and the type of files it infects depends on the type of viruses. And, historically, the first viruses created were either boot sector viruses and program viruses. So how do we avoid this? Be cautious about executing programs or opening documents sent to you. Install and run an antivirus program and maintain an up-to-date listing of virus signatures. Much of this is now built into your operating systems. They put, for instance, Windows Defender in and the like. Stay on top of the latest updates. Two advances in virus writing have made it more difficult for antivirus software to detect viruses. I told you this was very complicated. A stealth virus employs techniques to help it evade being detected. Anti-software viruses that uses checksums or other techniques. It looks as if it belongs there. Polymorphic viruses also attempt to evade detection, but they do so by changing the virus itself. So the virus evolves. And because the virus changes, signatures for the virus may no longer be valid, and the virus may escape detection by antivirus software. So the important thing to get out of this is, how do you avoid it? Do what we've been talking about. You be careful what you're opening. You install and run this. You stay on top of updates. You're also aware of the complexity in virus writings. And so viruses, when a new form of malware virus is discovered, antivirus companies and security researchers decompile the program and attempt to reverse engineering its functionality. Much can be determined from reverse engineering, such as where the malware came from, how it works, how it communicates, how it spreads, and so forth. Armoring malware can make the process of determining the information much more difficult, if not impossible. Some malware, such as Zeus, comes encrypted in ways to prevent criminals from stealing the intellectual property of the very malware they use. So I kind of like that the malware protects itself. And users are susceptible to virus hoaxes due to prior virus outbreaks. So, something gets put out on social media about a new virus and the danger it poses, and the hoax may warn them not to read certain files. But hoaxes can be just as destructive because it wastes time and bandwidth. We come to worms. It was once easy to distinguish between worm and virus, but recently, with the introduction of new breeds of sophisticated malicious code, this distinction has blurred. And viruses were generally thought of as a system-based problem, and worms were network-based. The malicious code is sent through a network and may subsequently be called a worm. And the protection against worms depends on the type of worm. So how do you avoid this? You don't open files or attachments unless they are absolutely sure of their origin and integrity. I'm going to skip this one unless you're just interested in this. I've left the slide in about polymorphic malware. It changes the coding after each use, makes the replicant different from a detection point. So the whole point is it doesn't match an existing signature. We come to Trojan Horses or Trojans, a piece of software that appears to do one thing, of course, alluding back to the Greek Trojan War. It's a standalone program. Must be copied and installed by the user. It's hiding some nefarious functionality. To prevent the introduction of this, you never run software ensure of its origin, security, and integrity, and you keep a virus checking program running on the system. And then we have rootkits, which is a form of malware specifically designed to modify the operation of the operating system in some fashion to facilitate non-standard functionality. So they were originally designed to allow a program to take greater control over operating system function when it fails or becomes unresponsive. They can do virtually anything that the operating system's done. Rootkits modify the operating system kernel and supporting functions, changing the nature of the system's operation. They're designed to avoid, either by subversion or evasion, the security functions of the operating system to avoid detection. Rootkits act as a form of malware that can change thread priorities to boost an application's performance, perform key logging, act as a sniffer, hide other files. This is a highly sophisticated type of attack. The use of the rootkit functionality to hide other process and files enables an attacker to use a portion of a computer without the user or other application know what's happening. And this hides exploit code from antivirus and anti-spyware programs, acting as a cloak of invisibility. They can load before the operating system's loaded, acting as a virtualization layer. They can exist in firmware. They can exist as loadable library modules, effectively changing part of the operating systems. And once it's detected, it needs to be removed and cleaned up, obviously. Because of rootkit's invasive nature and the fact that many aspects of it are not easily detectable, most systems administrators don't even attempt to clean up or remove it. It's far easier to previously, use a previously clean system image and re-image the machine than to attempt to determine the depth and breadth of the damage of the individual file. Going through these pretty fast. You need to know the definitions. You need to know kind of where they fit in the taxonomy of attack vectors and the like. So we come to logic bombs, a piece of code that sits dormant for a period of time until something happens to invoke its malicious payload. It's difficult to detect because they're often installed by authorized users, and it demonstrates the need for separation of duties and a periodic review of all programs and services that are running for the system. It also demonstrates the need to maintain an active backup program so that if your organization loses critical files to this sort of malicious code, it loses only transactions that occurred since the most recent backup and no permanent loss of data. Spyware does just that. It spies on users. It's typically keyloggers. It's typically installed without user knowledge. It can do a wide range of activities. Many of these seem innocuous at first, but any unauthorized monitoring of a system can be abused very easily. So spyware is specifically designed to steal information. Most states have passed legislation banning the unapproved installation of software, but many cases of spyware circumvent this issue through complex and confusing end-user license agreements. And adware. Adware is software that is supported by advertising and agrees to the arrangement in return for a free use of the software. And anytime you get something free, you might wonder what the real cost is. I know years ago we had to warn a company I was working with that people were taking their computers home at night and letting their kids download free games off the internet, and we're like, why are these things free? So anything that's free. Botnets, a good one. It's one form of malware that is seemingly benign to a user is a botnet zombie. They create armies of machines basically by installing malware agents on the machines. I typically think of botnets of agents that have gone to the dark side, right? We have a lot of software that's based on software agents and the like, but when they become botnets, they begin to conduct other attacks and to spread spam and other malware, and they've grown into a network of over 1 million nodes and are basically responsible for our tens of millions of spam messages we get. Okay, backdoors were originally created as something with methods used by software developers that ensured they could gain access to an application. If something went wrong, they could get in. Now they're used as a mechanism for attacks. So a typical backdoor is where it's hard-coded in, it can't be removed, and someone can come in later when they have lost access to the machine and still access the machine. There's a company called Oil Pro. You may want to Google the story. The man sold the company for something like $51 million. He later was arrested under federal charges. He had left a back door and he'd gone in and scraped their database. The company itself was set up to be kind of a LinkedIn for those working in oil and gas. The company later went out of business, but it was also like, you know, guy, you got 51 million. I don't know how much of that you kept after you paid off your venture capitalists, but was it worth it to have federal charges? But basically the CEO, the original owner and founder of the company, had left this back door in and used it to steal data. And that's what it's used for. Now, a big one today is ransomware. It's a form of malware that performs some action, extracts a ransom from a user, typically encrypting a file, a data hard drive, you know, rendering your service unusable. It's increasing. There are 2 attacks you should be thinking about on your own. We do so much in this class. If we had more time, but look at the Maersk attack, M-A-E-R-S-K attack that occurred 2017. If you're not familiar with Maersk, you might have seen their trucks on the highway, shipping containers. They are one of the largest, if not the largest, worldwide shipping. You're talking about something like $1 trillion of goods and services that are sent worldwide per day. Now, Maersk does not have all of that business, but they have a significant part of that business. They were the victim of ransomware in the summer of 2017. They had to completely shut off operations. So that's a major ransomware attack. You might just Google ransomware attacks in general. I met a woman who was running a company started by her father in the 60s or 70s. This has just been the last couple of months. They were hit by ransomware. They came very close to completely having to shut down the company until they had found, luckily, one server somewhere that had not been properly updated and had old versions of the data, and they recovered 95%. In both of those cases, Maersk and this individual that I talked to refused to pay the ransom. The problem with paying the ransom is only about half of the systems ever get unencrypted. So you're basically playing the lotto with your data. So let's end this now with malware defenses. How do we defend against it? We use a strong antivirus program. We keep software up to date. The challenge, again, when you get out in the real world, you're going to see tracking software in a true enterprise and keeping track of all vendors' update is a huge problem. So it's easy to sit on this side of the desk and say, use an antivirus program, keep your software up to date, but that is a very difficult problem, just given the complexity of how integrated and interoperable our systems have become. So there are software products that can scan the machine to tell you what all the software installed and verify the vendor status. You know, for some standalone machines in your home, this type of program might save you some time. In small companies, this is essential to manage the complexity of patches needed across the machines, because the problem with small businesses, of course, is they don't have the manpower resources of a large IT staff. That is the end of video 1 for chapter 15. We will now go to video 2.